think looking at the agenda, it's going to be a great, very, very contextual, very relevant day, and hopefully we can get into some good, meaningful discussions about what's going on. So to start off, obviously we're talking about security-driven innovation, so I think I have the pleasure of working for lots of companies now rather than just a single individual organisation, and I think obviously all organisations are going through a level of digital change and how they actually interact with their customers. And I think from a security perspective, we obviously have to change our models and our approaches as well. So I'm going to be asking the panel some questions today that try and tease out, how they approached embracing innovation within their organisations, what challenges have they faced, and ultimately what's their experiences that they'd like to share with the room. But obviously there will be time, hopefully, for you all to chip in and obviously ask them some questions as well. So without much further ado, I'll ask them to start just a few minutes to introduce themselves. So Ashish, over to you.
Sure. So I'll try and speak louder. I don't have a mic. You don't hear me. So my name is Ashish Shrestha. I'm the InfoSec Director or Global Head for Clear Channel International. We are an outdoor media company, outdoor out-of-home advertising. So you may have seen our billboards, digital billboards, at the airport, train stations, motorways. So yeah, I've got a challenge of managing our digital security and digital network, which is our panels, and these are growing to become IoTs every day. So, and then obviously our corporate network as well. So yeah, my team looks after both sides of network for our business.
Morning everyone, Paul de Cruz. So I manage the cloud security business in EMEA, working for Cisco, which is around 80,000 employees globally. So you can imagine the kind of challenges that we have. A very mobile workforce, quite a changing go-to-market model where we're looking at more subscription services rather than just hardware and product services that we've been doing in the past. So I've been working various roles over the 20 years at Cisco, so happy to share some of those thoughts with you today.
Hi, good morning, Jason Walton. I'm the VP for Security Operations at Pearson. I've been with Pearson for about 2.5 years. For those of you who don't know who Pearson are, we are the provider of education to children all the way up through to 18 years old and beyond. So we do a complete education life experience. Many of you in the room who've taken professional exams will have taken them with Pearson View, which is part of the Pearson Group. I look after a varied, let's say, bunch of functions within my area across the globe, and it's very interesting, and some of the questions that we've got today certainly resonated with me. So looking forward to sharing that with you.
Good. Thank you. Yeah, so hello, I'm Richard Brinson. I'm currently the interim CISO for Unilever. So I've been doing that role for the last just over 12 months. I'm in the process of handing over to Bobby Ford, who couldn't be here today. So a little bit of a last minute stand-in. So yeah, no, really good opportunity to get out and do some networking. So thank you.
Good. So obviously a great panel. So let's get into the first question. So obviously working with lots of companies and working with some of your organisations as well, as businesses do embrace innovation, digital change and all of those aspects, I think it's really important that the security strategy remains aligned with the business strategy. If they go out of kilter, then obviously there's a bit of a challenge there. So my first question is really, how do you ensure that the security strategy does remain aligned with the business strategy? What techniques do you actually use? Paul, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So firstly, we're a very customer-focused organisation, so we're changing the business continuously to keep up with the landscape where our customers are going. So one concept that we've got is something called Cisco on Cisco, so we make sure IT operations, security operations very much work hand in hand with that customer-facing side of Cisco. So they're actually out there talking to our customers and seeing what our customers need, and also translating that back into how Cisco needs to change as well. So by doing that, the security function's right at the front of what we're doing as Cisco and where we're going as a business. Mm-hmm. So that really makes them think about how do we need to change, how do we work internally as well. So that function is really well used, and maybe some of you here have also met some of our team through that Cisco and Cisco function as well.
Great.
Yeah, for me, I think it's quite straightforward, really. It's just about having that regular dialogue. So I think some of the things that we talk about regularly, which are really important, are the things that we're not doing. So
Yep.
trying to understand what the business priorities are. So rather than being a security team going telling the business what we think is important, just continuously asking your stakeholders, whether it's the CFO, the CEO, what is important to the business? Have we got this right? There are finite resources. We don't have, we can spend all the company's money trying to go after everything. So we've got to be very, very careful in terms of what we prioritize. And we go and explicitly get that feedback. Is this the right things for the business? And more importantly, all these things that we're not going to do, how do you feel about those? Do you want to give us some more money to do those, or should we stop doing something that's more important? So those are the sorts of conversations. So have that dialogue regularly. I think you tend to stay aligned.
Good, really good points. Jason?
Yeah, so I kind of agree with you on that one. It's Pearson's actually really lucky to one of the first organisations, global organisations as well, of its size, where we have a good interaction right up to the CEO, John Fallon. And so we look very closely at what his goals and what his targets are and what his business strategy is, certainly over the next 2 to 5 years. And we align with as much as we possibly can to deliver really the security around his vision, as well as protecting our users and learners from different angles. But very much so we're tied into that from CEO down. And I think that's one of the key aspects. It's very difficult, I know, in working for other organisations where you don't have that. And that is where it can be a real challenge. And I think that's today still very much a challenge in a lot of organisations where they don't have that buy-in.
Absolutely. Ashish?
I'm probably going to reiterate similar things, but for my organisation, obviously we've got approximately 20,000 panels in 22 countries globally. So any kind of adversarial behavior is immediately visible to public eyes. If let's say one of the panels get compromised, one of the prime locations we have is Piccadilly Circus, and if that, all the panels in Piccadilly Circus get compromised, that impact is immediately visible to business. So, for me, what has really helped, the key has been how do I align security strategy with business operational strategy, is having that risk-based conversation, about brand damage. This has always helped bring things back to perspective when I'm sitting in a room with my peers, whether it be IT director, marketing director, and having that really, conversation around why is security important in whatever we are doing. So, bringing things back to business. Sure, it might help security. Sure, it might help IT. But how does this, mitigate business risks that we have? And in some of the areas we are. We are present in sensitive areas like airports and train stations where they demand security from us. So, we don't want to be compromising on security where we could be losing, like a tender in these areas, and that could have a business impact. So, yeah, framing it in a business risk language always helps. And then, speaking this, it's all about speaking the common language with the business. They understand risk. If we start talking in technical jargons and security jargons, promoting security as a back art, then that is never going to go down well with business.
No, very true. So I think certainly in my experience, organisations that are embracing like a cloud first or a drive for digital strategy, have historically very complex infrastructures and application landscapes, and I think it's safe to say in the security perspective, complexity is the enemy of security. So, I mean, in your experiences, how do you ensure that these cloud-first strategies, the drive for digital, the DevOps and the agile approaches, that they're actually introducing more simplicity into the organisation rather than another layer of complexity? So, what's your approach for, I suppose, the governance and management of those? Paul, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I've got an interesting position because I work with customers and outbound from a SaaS perspective in the cloud business, and a lot of the questions that come to us around our services are where they based, how they secured, the data continuity aspects of the service. So these are the same sort of principles that we use within Cisco in assessing what cloud solutions that we're going to go with. And I think when I presented here last year, we kind of asked the audience around kind of how many were taking that cloud-first policy, what the balance of cloud solutions versus on-prem solutions were. And it'd be interesting to see when we present today how that's changed, but it definitely is changing. A lot of the customers that I'm working with at the moment, you've got multi-cloud environments, much like Cisco. So again, those security controls, they need to have some consistency of how They can put those controls across multiple platforms, and that's what, again, I see from customers coming in to my business around how can we get that consistency. And we've acquired about 4 or 5 different SaaS plays now, and again, we're aligning those in that way to make it simpler for customers. So these are the things that I think CISOs are looking at around how can I procure those services and drive that cloud-first policy.
Good. Ashish?
My take on cloud is like we have to enable security in whatever environment that business decide to operate in, right? So we need to look at the opportunities, the capability, the features that cloud bring to us. If there's a ribbon of like security operational levers that we can get from cloud. Some of the visibility which was limited to, let's say, an IT engineer in traditional world. So, for example, IT have been overwhelmed with keeping the green lights on. They have back-to-back developments happening, business development happening, and they didn't necessarily have time for security. Whereas with cloud, you can leverage these options that cloud operators provide you. Like with AWS, you've got, for example, guard duty that you can benefit from. That gives you visibility of your cloud cloud technology, which previously you wouldn't have unless you have a direct access to a server, or IT kind of script something for you that your team can monitor. So you can it's about leveraging that opportunity that cloud brings and supporting that product development velocity and agility within the business.
Good. Jason?
This is something very close to my heart, Bryan. So obviously for me, the challenge is really around keeping things as simple as possible. It is really difficult. So we do have multi-cloud environments, we have on-premise, and we have multiple providers as well. And the trick is obviously, whilst thinking about defense in depth, that's great, but that brings with it a myriad of different technologies, and trying to operate different technologies and monitor different aspects of that is very, very difficult. So one of the things that we're looking at the moment is really trying to simplify, one, our infrastructure, secondly, the technology stack that we have, and the way in which we operate that and monitor that. I think we'll touch on it a bit later, but certainly the use of your data is really key at the back end and how you interrogate that. But yeah, for me, really, it's we've got to drive a much more simple approach to security and the technologies that we use, and really leverage them. To your point, it's going to be key, especially within the cloud environments.
Absolutely. And Richard?
Yeah, so I mean, in theory, the cloud should be a greenfield site, right? So you should be able to get it right. Yeah. Unfortunately, we come to the table a little bit late quite often, and things are already out there. So trying to fix stuff in retrospect is always a challenge. But from the Unilever point of view, we use a lot of different cloud services, and we have struggled to try and get our hands around or get our arms around all of it. So we use a lot of Azure, a lot of AWS, we use a lot of Google, we use a lot of Alibaba Cloud, and lots and lots of others. So rather than trying to create particular patterns and designs for each of these, we've just been fanatical about getting the message about secure by design out there, and really providing principles to developers and to the DevOps teams to make sure, and then coming around and governing in retrospect. So that we've given you some really clear guiding principles to go and set this up. Be sensible, please, and we're going to come and check what you're doing.
Absolutely. So I think, it's certainly an interesting time in security, and I think like digital, agile, DevOps, all words that are coming up at the moment. But obviously they require a very different approach from a security methodology and an interaction with those teams than perhaps a traditional waterfall product. So I'm really interested in how you've had to evolve your security functions or your approach to the business to be able to support them in their drive for digital, agile, DevOps, etc., as they drive an innovation strategy. Ashish?
Sure. So something that I worked in my previous organization as well, integrating security into DevOps or CI/CD model, and something that I've been investing quite a lot of time here at Clear Channel as well. The key thing is, first and foremost, is we need to break silos between the teams. IT, development team, business, and security. And the second thing is we need to look at how can we bring in lean security operations. You know, like what worked in traditional waterfall kind of model does not work in Agile. You know, the sprints are hardly 2 weeks long. I mean, how are we supposed to deliver security in that? So empowering, DevOps team with right principles, right toolings is the way forward. And what do I mean by that is looking at, not necessarily a blanket automation, but more like intelligent automation. Like automation is what a buzzword now. But, we can't automate everything. So what, we need to work with the different teams, especially DevOps teams, to understand, okay, how can you automate make certain things simple? For example, we could agree on a minimum security benchmark that a product needs to meet, whether it be let's say a web application that is being developed. That's the minimum benchmark, and it's no different to what they're doing. They have got a minimum build that they need to adhere to. Right? So minimum security benchmark, and providing them with a tool that can automate the validation of the code against this minimum benchmark, rather than it having to come back to security and one of the security analysts is going through the codes and doing the code analysis. Why don't we provide them with a tool to do that automated code analysis, and then we agree on a benchmark. Okay, if it meets certain threshold, if you're developing a product under certain threshold, fine, go and deploy it. But if it exceeds that threshold, that build is failed, you have to fix the problem, and when I say intelligent automation, you need to make sure there are manual intervention at right point in time, right milestone. So that's when security team can come in, for example, exception management. We have to go live with this product. We've encountered this issue. Security team, how can you help us minimize the risk?
Yep.
And that's where we come in. Now, all of a sudden, we are not bottlenecking the process. We've given them the right set of tools. We've kind of driven that intelligent automation, and we're not slowing down, again, product development velocity.
Good, really good answer. Richard?
Yeah, I echo a lot of those thoughts, really. And there's a lot of good stuff there. So I think some of the stuff we've done has been around creating cross-functional teams, and the old adage is what gets measured gets done. And you find that actually, if you start measuring teams on joint outcomes, you can get some interesting behavioural change. So, for example, not just measuring security risk on a product, but talking about security as a measure of quality, and measuring the developers on what is the quality of your product. And then, likewise, you've usually got to give something as well. So, if you try and measure a security team on things like usability, not just security, then you start getting these interesting sort of dynamics where they are working together, not with different objectives, but with the same objectives. And that, for me, has worked really, really well.
Good.
So.
Paul?
Yeah, so I think we've gone for that kind of waterfall check and enforce at the end to trying to make sure we've got security in all aspects of the build. I think there's a change in actually how the developers have had to move to that agile model within Cisco, as well as the security team. So it's given us an opportunity to rework that and actually add security in at every stage and add it in more of a bite-sized fashion as well. So it's a real culture change. I mean, that's the aspects around this as well. It's a culture change on how people work. And we've done simple things like, looking at things like hackathons and those kind of areas to give business, reasons for people to work together and, work on an outcome together as well as a team. So they get to know each other and those ways of working, and then kind of bringing the kind of bigger business problems into bear as well with the security teams. So they think about security, each step rather than as an end result, as an enforcement result.
And Jason? Very relevant for you.
Probably very relevant for me. So Pearson is extremely agile already, and we do have quite a mature DevSecOps model. Interestingly, CISO is actually ahead of the rest of the organisation for once, which is quite a pleasure, but it's also very difficult as well. I won't scare anybody, but the way that we're looking at this at the moment from a CISO perspective is really around changing the way we present ourselves. So rather than having a traditional SecOps, engineering, risk, it's all about owning and deploying services. So when I mean deploying services, what we're actually striving towards is consumable API services that the developers and our customers, obviously who could be developers and stakeholders, product owners, they actually consume the services. What's left from that really is the stuff that we can't automate or we can't orchestrate, and we'll work on how we manage that separately. But ultimately, my job won't exist. So as a SecOps leader, It won't exist. I'll just have a set of services that I actually run and then we look after. But it's all being consumed. And that's reflected currently in our KPIs. We've started to implement this year. So you'll hear things like velocity, capability, availability, coverage. And they're really the things that we're striving towards. So things are changing very much in the security arena. When I talk to people across this industry, they're very surprised how far ahead we actually are in terms of making that difference. But I think the key to this is being adaptable. So yes, we've got multiple environments, and yes, they're cloud, yes, they're on-premise, but in order to adapt and move forward, we really do need to look at the way we operate and present our operating model. And I think the more services that people can consume, the easier it is for them. All your principles, all your standards should be embedded within those APIs, so there isn't really a struggle there. And to your point, making sure that security by design is up front, that remains and that keeps going. So I think it's an interesting landscape at the moment, and seeing a lot of people do that change. What I've certainly found is certainly the people that are born in the cloud work that way already. It's usually us lot. So us lot who have been on-prem for years and years and years that want to move to the cloud. You'll find that we're really starting to have to change that. And it's a tricky cultural thing to do across organisations today.
Good. So I think, so Richard, you mentioned, when we go to cloud, sometimes we're a little late to the party, and Jason, one of your metrics is coverage. And what I read into that, having been a CISO many times, is, sometimes you struggle to get your arms around everything that the business is actually doing. Some people want to work with you, some people honestly don't want to work with you and will actively try and bypass you to get what they want live. So I'm interested to know, what measures have you kind of put in place at an organisational level to kind of ensure that you're involved in those conversations, at the beginning, so the security function can really add value. So what are your tactics and approaches to really be involved in everything that the business is doing? Richard?
Yeah, well, shadow IT is an interesting one. It's not one that's going to go away, unfortunately, and you can't really try and shut it down without stifling the business. So it's people are trying to innovate, and they have the right motives. They're trying to do things because it's maybe a path of least resistance versus doing something corporate. So one of the best things we've done to help with that is drive a culture of accountability, and we've done that by moving a lot of the risk ownership and risk sign-off process into the areas of the business. So rather than having the security team signing off all the risks and effectively giving people get-out-of-jail-free cards, we're moving that risk to so that the benefactors of the system or the service. So the HR director, for example, would be he'd be the one signing off a risk in relation to the HR system. So he'd be the one losing sleep, not somebody junior in IT who's trying to fix this. And that has driven a cultural change, and that people are now starting to feel a bit more responsible, akin to sort of how they feel about their financial budget. So we've got some mechanisms that also don't just allow people to sign anything off, because of course we can report up to the audit committee who's owning which risk. But effectively now what we can do is assign a risk weighting to each of the divisions and each of the directors or heads or VPs in each division, so you can see where the risk is coming, and we're reminding people all the time that they have these risks and they need to do something about them. So that for us has made a big difference.
Okay, good. And Paul?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, just leading on from what Richard's saying there about the risks and working with the different business lines. What we've found is, first of all, to delegate that kind of ownership, a lot of those teams need to understand what kind of tools are being used, maybe from an application discovery process, to understand what shadow IT is out there, because typically their teams will try and be as productive as possible by using those external tools that they're not aware of. So providing them with those tool sets to actually look and understand what's being used, and then why those users need those tools, because they could potentially professionalise those tools for use within the business as well to help those users be more productive. So it's a balance of kind of that risk being distributed out of the decision-making processes out to the business units, as well as giving the tools to those business units to actually see what tools are being used by their, or shadow IT is being used by their employees as well.
Good. Ashish?
So going back to the point Richard and Paul also mentioned is just reiterating, the whole inception of cloud was giving business and developer community a platform to innovate, and that increased the shadow IT operations within the business, because you could develop in cloud, implement in cloud without a central service knowing about it. So that kind of increase shadow IT within businesses that were adopting cloud. So, how addressing this challenge is, first thing is we need to foster collaboration between business. As I mentioned earlier, breaking silos within the business, within DevOps community or developer community or security and IT community. At the same time, I want to go back to the point Jason mentioned earlier about how can we provide a consumable service. Why can't we go down the cloud, like computing route, security as a service, right? Okay, like for example, our HR team in Spain are looking for a new payroll system. Like I don't want to be there trying to give them, okay, this is our password policy, this is our, complexity around how the authentication should be handled. What I'll do is, I'll publish, why can't we publish authentication as a service? So they can just consume this service. Now, whatever application you buy, you plug into the service, and that will handle the authentication or the login security based on our requirements. Right? So fostering that collaboration. And one thing that I've noticed from my own personal experience is it's not finance that is problem. It's not, yes, budget is needed, but it's uncorrelated to the success of security. It's the business relationship, the political barrier we have between the teams. That's what we need to break, and that can only happen if once you start fostering collaboration, and that becomes. I know it's challenging, but it is a key part to building a strategy that endures.
Good. And Jason?
Yeah, again, so this is another interesting subject for us. In terms of measures, I think everyone in this room has their metrics and what they need to achieve every year. Interestingly, though, I think, again, we're seeing this turnaround, certainly within Pearson, we're starting to drive this accountability, and it does make a difference. So when you've got metrics to deliver, let's just take patching, for example. It's probably everyone's favourite subject in the room. What you'll find is that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of vulnerabilities across our organisations. Interestingly, it's usually the CISO function that takes responsibility for that, reporting up to their CISO or reporting up to their CIO. Yes, we've got this many. We're getting them down, obviously with the help of individuals from different departments. We've actually swung that around. So now we're holding presidents and senior leaders of that accountable. So if their departments are not doing what they need to do, they get reported. So we have a lovely league table, right? So it's great because nobody wants to be that person at the top. So we bring them down. But putting that accountability, putting that risk back onto those people really does make a difference. And it's interesting how many do start to make progress. What's really key, though, is to treat it not so much as you will do this, but it's to actually set up, and we have done, set up communities so that you talk about this. So it's not you get one person in the room. You bring everybody together. You talk about the issues. You talk about why it's important. And that's got to resonate really, really closely, particularly with cloud. So recently, maybe in the last couple of weeks, had some very interesting conversations. So on-premise, as many of you, I think, your IT function probably takes care of a lot of the OS patching, etc. When that moves to cloud, it becomes very different. They don't. The people that own the accounts do. They have full responsibility for everything. And it's amazing that people seem to think that the fairy dust gets sprinkled in the AWS arena and everything's fine, and that's not the case. So really building these communities, not just about patching, but really around the whole security culture and awareness of what actual responsibility they have towards making sure that their controls and security are put in, that does resonate. That makes a big difference because they're the ones ultimately responsible for affecting the security of the company's customer, if you like. All right, so it's not just them, it's not just internal, it's about the customer. So ultimately, that's what we all do. That's what we're all here for, is to make sure that our customers have a secure journey through their entire life cycle. So that's the approach we've taken, and so far it's certainly proving fruitful.
I think from a working together perspective, we've touched on it a little bit. So in my past lives, an organisation has kind of segmented itself and had a traditional business model, but then a very cool digital entity where everyone was recruited from Activision, etc., and a very different working style. Instead of the corporate laptop build, everything is Mac, etc. have to wear a tie in that building. If you wear a tie in that building, it gets cut off and pinned on the tie wall. So it's very different cultures and things like that. So I suppose my question is, how do you get that harmonic way of working between those two different areas, and can that be achieved? And if so, what have you guys done to kind of enable that journey and that effective collaboration? Richard?
I think a good place to start is trying to speak the same language.
Yep.
Because I think a lot of the times we're talking about security controls, security, various things that are coming down the road, and developers are talking in a completely different language. So we talk about security baseline controls, and they talk about user stories. So I mean, one of the things that we did was took all of our baseline controls and mapped them all to a security story, so that whenever we had a particular type of build going on within DevOps, we can say, oh, that's a website, here's your security stories for that, and they automatically understand, okay, that's fine, we can put these in the backlog, and we'll work through those, and then you can retrospectively go and say, did you actually achieve those? And if you build the testing in, to Ashish's point as well, if you build the testing into that early stage as well, then you can sort of offer them the getting out of the pen test at the end of it as well. So, there are things that you can do that makes it more attractive for them to work the way you want them to work. But trying to talk the same language is absolutely key.
Ashish?
Absolutely. The first thing is we have to kind of put ourselves in that DevOps mindset as well. As we've previously in previous questions we've mentioned across the panel, where we need to be kind of in a way introducing, again, repeating myself, security as a service. The whole DevOps mentality. We need to shift left as well. Secure by design principles. And also finding things early, fixing things early. And the key thing is knowledge-based, sharing and distributing that knowledge with DevOps community. Surely they understand cloud, surely they understand containers, but they don't necessarily understand security, and that's where we can come in. We can, as Paul mentioned earlier, we can organize hackathons, we can establish community practice. Where we can share our knowledge, where we can help DevOps community understand the intricacies of security challenges. How can adversarial behavior have an impact on whatever they're developing? So, again, yes, secure by design. Fix things. Find things early, fix things early. Share your knowledge, and then trust but do verify. So that's the mantra.
Jason?
Does it ever work?
Yeah, it can do, yeah. To a degree, yeah.
To a degree. So we found that actually embedding resources into other teams, to your point really, that's driven that culture. So rather than hire to put them into the security team, we actually hire to put them into the development team. So that's none more prevalent than what we've done today in terms of we are developing a new cloud platform. And we hired roughly around 20 security people with developing skills in terms of coding, and we've actually embedded those into those project delivery teams. So whilst they actually sort of report into us, they're managed daily, and they work very, very closely with the development teams, and that's working well, and certainly a model I think we will continue to use. As you say, speaking the same language is very important. So what we found was, rather than trying to get people to talk that language, you just are never going to achieve that. Get the young kids in, so to speak, and let's get those guys in, because they already talk the language. They do it today, and they have a security background as well, which is really beneficial. And so we're seeing good results in terms of breaking those barriers down, and people actually achieving real outcomes.
Good. Paul?
Yeah, I think just leading in from Jason, talking about getting the kids in, we've got about 5 apprentices coming into my area of the business next year, and that's one way of growing up from the kind of bottom up around some of those skills and talent, and just the inquisitive nature of some of that new talent coming in, but also the rotation piece as well. We rotate a lot within the business. Some of the best people will take and rotate, and sometimes you think, oh, that's a bit of a loss. I'm losing one of the persons in my team out of a project, and maybe they're rotating, but actually you get a lot more value back because people then understand different ways of working, different environments, especially when we start talking about the cloud, AWS, Azure, Google and so forth. If you've got architects that are then working with security practitioners that then understand that environment, then they can actually help apply better as well. So that goes for any of these kind of technology transitions that go on, maybe from physical infrastructure to virtualized infrastructures. If I look in the past of when I went through that, right through to now in the cloud adoption, and there'll be many more adoptions in my life cycle, I'm sure.
Good. Right, we've got time for one more question. Has anyone got a question in the room? Or I can... Right, I'll go off piste with these guys then, so I don't know about this one. So we've talked about, I suppose, supporting the business with agile DevOps and different ways of embracing cloud, etc. But I suppose, how have you done it within your security functions? You know, rather than just supporting the business, you know, what have you done to drive agile DevOps and things like that within your own security functions, if at all? Richard?
Minimal in terms of DevOps, or getting that sort of build and run feature up and running. But we have been looking at a lot of process automation. So where we've got a lot of sort of resource intensive processes. So vulnerability scanning will be one of those services. Some of the secure by design stuff. So we're automating our secure baseline controls and making sure we've got ways that IT platforms can do self-service on those rather than having to come. So a little bit like the API, and there's the security as a service as well. But we're still at the very basis of using RPA and things like that just to start automating those base processes.
Good, and well done for going first. You didn't know that was coming. Jason?
I'm probably extremely lucky. We're very mature in terms of our agile and DevSecOps approach. Every team across CISO has Jira, uses Jira daily. So we have backlogs, we have user stories, and it's all driven through that. We also have CISO services which our users can request. Again, that all goes into backlogs. It's all driven through user stories, and that's right across the board. In terms of the build and run, security operations has many different features within it. Certainly within Pearson, some we own outright. Others we actually have dependency and we co-own. So with our peers within engineering, for example, we'll own that entire service end to end. So it won't just be us that's responsible for that. And again, it's really sort of that build run mentality. You build it, you own it, you run it, you look after it, and that is working very well. I think it's an interesting one. Once you start to get into this kind of agile approach, it does make a lot of sense, and actually it really helps, and you can do quite a lot with it. So you can do, in terms of forecasting, where you're going to be in sort of 2 weeks, because you tend to do short sprints, or we certainly do within Pearson, it's about 2 week sprints. You can really sort of forecast where you're going to be, and what's also good is you can actually show true outcomes. So actual delivery, which is a real key factor in any CISO organisation.
Good, cool.
Yeah, so I think the luxury we've got is that we acquire a lot of organisations, probably 10, 15 a year, and through that we get a lot of talent coming in. So we've used that and brought those into things like hackathons, where we then actually have an outcome as a business and put that into good use. So some recent ones we've done is optimise how we can roll out new services. So the test and dev part of it before it goes into operate. So we've done that through hackathons using this agile model, and also bringing in some of those third-party acquisitions quite quickly by actually getting the engineers and DevOps teams working together. So that's another way of building that kind of collaborative culture, and also the kind of DevOps way as well.
Good. And Ashish?
For me, not so Clear Channel. Obviously, we're at that inception stage of adopting DevOps. Only let's say 8 to 10 years back, the only technology we had was a white van and a man going around sticking the like posters. But now we are making that shift towards digital technology. DevOps is kind of starting within Clear Channel as well. But speaking from my previous experience, where we had 4 products and fully on CI/CD or operating CI/CD model. So I had a very small team. I had a team of 3 there. So we had to come up with an approach where how do we make sure that security is part of every single product development. So similar to the concept Jason mentioned earlier, what we did was we identified security champions in each product areas. We used to take them along in security events so that they understand the security challenges, and that also helped us instill accountability at the product level. So we had security champions in each product stream, We used to give them trainings, etc., whether it be in-house trainings or we used to send them for paid-for trainings. And that combined with use of like open source and paid intelligence and frameworks as well. So we were utilizing quite a lot of NIST and SANS framework, open source frameworks.
Mm-hmm.
There's quite a lot around there. Obviously, in GitHub, you can find quite a lot of security, open source security frameworks. So we were leveraging that. We were empowering the DevOps team, so whereby we were plugging in automated scanning as a part of the CI/CD model, doing static code analysis as a part of the whole CI/CD model. So what we did was we introduced a security benchmark. We do a static code analysis as the developers were, at the inception stage itself, and then once we had let's say the first prototype ready, if you will, then we were also again automating that. If like that kind of a red teaming exercise where we were trying to hack that product. So that helped quite a lot in the previous organization.
Yeah, really good. Okay, so I'd like to thank the panel. So well done. So I think